As the Stanley Cup playoffs continue on ESPN, anything is possible. So the decorations could get a little out of hand. And a city could get a new landmark. Could a kraken arise? Could the storm surge? Could it happen for the first time? Could it happen again? Yeah, that could happen. That is playoff hockey. The Stanley Cup playoffs continue on ESPN.
Welcome back to the podcast that never needs recharging. This is Tennis Unfiltered.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Yes, I'm James Gray of iNewspaper and iNews.co.uk. As always, I've got our resident and soon-to-be constantly travelling, as far as I can tell, tennis coach Calvin Betton. George Belshaw is here as well. We've got loads to talk about this week. We'll go and talk about Carlos Alcaraz, Rafa Nadal, that video of him looking very, very pained indeed. The bloke who beat Carlos Alcaraz, whose name I still haven't worked out how to pronounce, much less spell. Holger Rune getting booed onto court as well as getting booed off it. Sofia Kenin, yes, she's back. Something about Andrew Richardson, remember him. And Yelena Ostapenko. There's plenty of tennis to talk about. I don't quite know where to start. George, have you got any technical issues that you're going to produce in the next couple of hours that are going to make my life even more difficult?
No, I don't think so. I'll be very well behaved, hopefully.
Good. I look forward to it. Oh, this is something I haven't done for a while, is ask people to leave us a review. And it has been a while since I've had to read out a 5-star review because people have all stopped doing them because they've all forgotten that the review function of podcasts exists. So this is my guarantee when it comes to reviews. If you leave us a 5-star review because you have a platform where you can do that, whether it's Spotify or Apple or whatever, or you've got a new iTunes account, not that iTunes exists anymore, go and rate us, make it 5 stars, write something nice about our podcast, and I guarantee I will read it out. Most recently, as popped up in my Chartable, said Tennis Pratt in Ireland, saying, great podcast, love the honesty, 5-star podcast. That's why we're the #1 tennis podcast in Ireland.
Can I just add a caveat to that, James? That you can write something horrible as long as you give a 5-star review as well.
Yeah,
he'll still read it.
Anything on that auto cue, I will read. That's the rule. But yeah, thank you to everyone who has previously left reviews, and thank you to everyone who sends us nice emails, tennisunfiltered@gmail.com. Thank you to everyone who follows on Twitter @unfilteredtennis. We've had loads of growth in the last couple of weeks and months, and it's been really exciting to see more people come and find the podcast and talk to us about the podcast. I even recently bumped into someone on the train who was, as I spoke to them, listening to the podcast, which was an incredibly weird moment.
Did they speak to you first, or was it like
you
just spotted them watching it?
No, I wasn't like looking over their shoulder, being like, "Oh, sorry, that's actually my podcast you're listening to." No, they literally said hello, and I said hello, and then they said, "I was just listening to you." Oh, that's a bit weird. But lovely, and if you do see me on a train in South London, then feel free, as long as you're nice.
I had a slightly different version of that happen to me once, but the person took a photo of me on the train and then said, "Is this you?" and sent it to me like half an hour later. I was like, "What?" That's so. So
they took a photo of you.
Of me. I'd been to the gym and they sent it to me on like Instagram or something, I think. And then
do you think they thought it was actually not you? And
I think they were a little bit worried that they were about to introduce themselves to someone who wasn't the person they thought they were, basically. Right. And it definitely was me, but it was also quite freaky being like, "Oh, what the hell? Who's this person who's followed me on the tube?" But they were very nice. So.
I did very nearly introduce myself to someone in the US who looked so much like Calvin Betton that I was convinced it was including when I got within 10 feet of him, while like looking him square in the face. I was like, "That's Calvin." Turns out it was just a ball bloke, but yeah, it was very close.
Were they wearing a cowboy hat like the American evil Calvin?
Yeah, that's the doppelganger. Calvin, who's the weirdest person you've ever been mistaken for? Sean Dyche?
Let me think. I don't know his name, but there's that really, really camp guy who's on BBC a lot.
Is he a comedian? Oh, Tom Allen.
Yeah.
Tom Allen. Excellent.
I'm not sure I know who that is.
Oh, you will know him. He always wears a suit. He is really camp, and he's very funny, actually.
Oh yeah, you do look a bit like him. To be fair,
somebody did say that I looked like Jason Statham a few weeks ago, but I think that was more just because neither of us have hair. But could have been. It could have been similar sex appeal and build, but I think it was like.
I was gonna say the build is definitely there. My most famous one with this was in New York during the US Open. I was at a bar with some other journalists towards the end of the tournament, and it's a couple from Alabama, I think it was. They came over and said, "Oh my God, it's Jamie Murray," and they genuinely, and we just had them on, and I just took a selfie with these people, and Tamani Karayel from The Guardian, he ran over pretending to ask for a selfie for me as well. To kind of play along with it. So these people from Alabama, I like to think they went home and put this Facebook post up of me, like we bumped into Jamie Murray in a bar in New York, and then their friends telling them that's definitely not him. So.
I feel like what's particularly good about that is, Jamie Murray isn't that famous, with respect. Like he's obviously well known, but you could say to someone, "Look, I've got a picture of Jamie Murray," and they would go, "Well, yeah, I haven't really seen Jamie Murray for a while. Like that's probably what he looks like," and it would be quite reasonable. I get behind that. This is all great content for a podcast where no one technically knows what our faces look like. So I'm sure this is really engaging people. If you do want to see more of our faces, by the way, we're on TikTok now, and there's at least a post on there.
Are we?
Oh yeah, George. Yeah, it shows.
We're so down with the kids.
It shows how much attention you pay to stuff I post in the WhatsApp group that George doesn't even know we're on TikTok. Well, yes, find us Tennis Unfiltered on TikTok, and you too can watch Jason Statham talk about tennis. Right, that's quite enough nonsense. Let's talk about Rafa Nadal, shall we? Because the order of play simply says, are we convinced he's out of Roland Garros? I still don't have an answer. Calvin, based on all the evidence available to us, what do you think?
He's so hard to read, but I don't think he will play. But yeah, I'm sort of 51-49 on that. I wonder if he doesn't play, when will he be back? Imagine if he doesn't play that, he probably won't play Wimbledon.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, isn't it? Because traditionally it was always like he'll win the French Open, pull out of Queens, and then turn up and just Wimbledon be his only grass court tournament. But as you say, if he's really goosed or really struggling, then it's hard to see him like going through the pain barrier to risk, his whole hard court swing.
But then, I mean, the flip side of that is he has been on court, he's been hitting, so you'd imagine that it's not like so bad that he can't do anything. By the sounds of it, he's been going through practice and maybe he just doesn't feel he's ready to play a match. But we're still 2 weeks away as it is now from the French Open. So I don't know. I mean, I keep convincing myself of one way or another. He's always been so hard to read on injuries, though. You never, as we've alluded to on here before, you never know what injury he's got and how far away he is. He keeps his cards very close to his chest on that front. And it might have been you never know. It might have been a thing that, look, they might have said to him, look, if you don't play Rome, if you don't play Madrid, don't play Rome, you've got a pretty good chance of making the French. But if you play one of those, it puts it in jeopardy. And he's always going to take the French.
George, I do feel like we're going around in circles on this a little bit because it's a conversation we've had almost every week for a couple of weeks. But, there is new evidence available to us. People will have seen this video of Nadal, doubled over in pain during practice and then walking off court everyone around him looking pretty concerned. Although Mark Lopez, one of his coaches, looking not particularly concerned. So, but I think that is mostly his job to provide the positive input in what can be quite a brutal camp. I'm told Nadal did then hit the next day, so it clearly wasn't like, terminal. But when you see sort of player doing that in practice, what does it make you think?
Well, just on the next day thing, and you always have to take this with a little bit pinch of salt because it is just kind of Twitter commentary. But a lot of people were saying it was very kind of stationary hitting the next day was what I saw. So that doesn't necessarily inspire me.
Is this in Mallorca?
I'm not 100% sure. I thought it was in Italy, to be honest. That can't be right. Yeah, it must be at his academy. I'm not sure. I haven't done my research enough as ever. But yeah, the other huge bit of evidence, obviously, was he declined Bordeaux. Poor Bordeaux. They offered him a wild card, and he said, "No, I'm not coming."
I mean, that's
no one's shocked.
That is a bit like when those like non-league clubs put in a transfer bid for Lionel Messi and stuff. Like it's just like he's clearly if he wants a wild card, like, or if there's a wild card needed, that's not the way that conversation is going to go. Like it's not Bordeaux offering Nadal a wild card. It's Nadal ringing Bordeaux up and saying, "Oh, you've already offered them all. Well, maybe you just tell, I don't know, Arthur Feast that he doesn't need a wild card this week. And bung him 20,000 euros or whatever." It's not a surprise, is it? But I guess it made a newsline for various outlets.
Yeah, it's good play from the tournament director, isn't it, to kind of get a little bit of a news story and remind people that's happening. But yeah, I mean, look, I think Calvin's 51-49 is strong. I'm closer to kind of 80-20 now. I'm getting to the point where I'd be very surprised if we see him again before kind of the US hard court swing, to be honest.
And does that mean he doesn't retire then? Like if he doesn't play the French Open this year, he surely has to put off any plans that he had for retirement, if indeed he had some.
I don't know. I mean, it's really hard. I mean, it might just be terminal. I mean, that could. We don't know, do we? I mean, he's been trying to come back for quite a long time now. It's not, he announced he was going to be back for the start of the clay court season, didn't he, originally? And it's just being put off on a week by week basis. I don't know if there's another kind of medical intervention he can have. I know you said that the kind of surgery he had last time lasted for like 18 months or something. I don't know if there's some sort of other option that can be done, or what, quite often second surgeries, etc., aren't as effective as the first time around, and you're kind of increasing risk kind of longer term. So yeah, I don't think it's a very positive situation all around, really.
Well, this is the thing now, as you mentioned, that other surgery, the nerve ablation that he had last year. Yes, at the time, everything that I read about it suggested it would be 6 or 12 or 18 months. It's obviously not knowing the exact nerve and how much of it they burnt off, blah, blah, blah. But the idea was it was a kind of temporary fix, a sort of nerve block that would last a certain amount of time. Now, a little bit like when Tiger Woods had his spine fused, it's not something they usually do to people who are playing professional tennis. And so no doctor or physio could ever say, well, this is the recovery period guaranteed, because no one really knew what would be the case. So it may well be that because Nadal is fitter and stronger than anyone who's ever had this procedure, that it lasts longer, but equally by the same token, it could last shorter. No one seems quite sure. Whatever it is, at some point that's going to start wearing off, and he's going to have to revisit that problem. It's a chronic injury. It's not something that's going to have gone away in the meantime. And if he then gets to, a month's time, once he's missed the French Open, I reckon he would be prepared to sacrifice the rest of his season if it means it gives him one more French Open. So at that point, he might well go, okay, let's go and have surgery on my foot, if indeed there is a surgery, or I'll have another nerve ablation because he's enough of a lunatic to want to do that. Let's have an exploratory surgical procedure on my hip, see if we can do something about that, or at least find out what's wrong with it, because my guess is that there must be a larger problem than the one that was originally diagnosed, because he's now been out for double the amount of time he was expecting to be because of it. So I think probably he'll do a press conference probably after the French Open, or a big video on Twitter or something, and say, "See you in 2024." That's my guess at the moment, because I think he'll push it as far as he can. He'll get to the French Open draw and he'll go, "Nah, I'm not." Do you remember against Mackenzie McDonald in Australia? His wife Mary was in tears in the grandstand because he'd injured himself and was playing through the pain. If my partner was putting himself through something that was so painful like physically painful, that I was in tears watching, like it would be a deal breaker for me to tell him or her not to do that again. Like I would be like, if you go and do this to yourself again, and I have to watch it, like that's a breach of trust. Like this is not something that I think is okay for someone to do. So I'm just kind of hypothesizing that at some point, Rafa Nadal must have to compromise in his life. I don't know when that might be, but he's always said having kids wouldn't change his life. But maybe his wife can change his mind about something, because I don't think I would let my partner do that to themselves. But my partner's not a professional tennis player; she's a lawyer, so I guess it is a bit different. Anyway, I'm getting distracted. But there have been some people playing tennis in Rome, particularly some of the greatest players of all time. Specifically Novak Djokovic, who's also been under something of an injury cloud ahead of the French Open. He beat Thomas Etcheverry in the first round, and then Grigor Dimitrov, although Dimitrov did take a set off him, and I think probably had opportunities to be a bit dominant in that match, but Djokovic won the third 6-1 and cruised past him. George Djokovic didn't start with the sleeve on against Etcheverry and then put the sleeve on when I think he's a breakdown in the first set, and then I wasn't wearing it for the Dimitrov match. I hesitate to say, do we think Djokovic is really injured because of that can of worms? But on the basis of what you've seen in the last couple of days, where are we with that?
Yeah, he's just so funny to try and get a read of. I watched a lot of the Etcheverry match. I switched on after he was a breakdown, to be honest, because I was like, oh, here we go again. His Novak's in serious trouble, and it felt like a guy who'd not really had much match play for the last 3 or 4 months, feeling his way in. There were moments where he was really good. He started to kind of get on top with his forehand, was playing some really good stuff. But he was also rusty, and he looked like a guy who, will certainly need these matches this week. He'll have played Cameron Norrie probably by the time most people hear this tomorrow. But I think regardless of how that match goes, for him to have got 3 matches under his belt this week is huge for him in terms of kind of French Open preparation, and he may well end up with more. As far as the injury goes, I mean, I do always think with Djokovic, it is so random to bother keep trying to pretend there's problems before Grand Slams and not actually have one. I do think there is some problem here, and particularly given it's an area he actually did have to go and have surgery on eventually, which, as we all know, he was incredibly hesitant to do. Does suggest there should be some concern, but yeah, I'm fairly sure he'll be fine. I'm getting less and less convinced he's going to win it, though, to be honest. I say that even though I'm acknowledging we're going to talk about Alcaraz's really surprise result earlier. I don't know. I've got a bit of a hesitant feeling to back Novak in Paris. It's always been a bit of a funny tournament for him. He's played some amazing tennis there and kind of fallen to Nadal, but last couple of years I've not really felt him at his peak there, even though he actually did win it a couple of years ago. I didn't really feel like he actually played amazing stuff that year, but maybe I'm being a bit harsh there.
He was obviously asked about it in Rome, inevitably. He said it's all good. I mean, there's always some things here and there that bother you on this level. It's normal, and also when you're not 25 anymore, I guess you experience that a bit more than what used to be the case. It takes a little bit more time to recover, I guess. But I feel good. I miss competition. I love playing in Rome. Calvin, I think that's quite interesting to hear Djokovic say that. I mean, he talks a lot, so sometimes it's hard to remember everything that he said. And I'm sure there are some people out there on Twitter who will be able to recite his every word. But I'm not sure that I've ever convinced that I've heard him acknowledge that he too is subject to age. But particularly physically, I don't feel like he's ever gone, oh, I am old, like it's allowed to hurt sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, he's always a bit of a paradox like that, though, isn't he? That he's always sort of basically denying that he's injured and at the same time always saying that he's injured in a weird way, or that denying that he's ever tired, but then always making out that he's tired. Like, so everything's always a contradiction with him and a total paradox. So I know that I'll offend people by saying it, but I just can't take anything that he ever says seriously anymore. I just find it also contrived and like he's always trying to send some sort of message. I find him a person who I very rarely feel talks candidly and honestly. I think he's always trying to say everything feels over thought out, and there's always some sort of ulterior thing behind what he's actually saying.
Maybe when he's angry on court, he speaks honestly. When he's shouting in Serbian.
Even a lot of that, though, I feel like is he's trying to do that to put the opponent off or something, or to cover something up. I don't think even that, even when he gets really angry, most of the time, I always feel it's a bit contrived.
I know what you mean. I think he is intelligent. That's the first thing to say, and not much of what he says is unthought out. I think that's certainly true. You can see it. He's a genius at doing this in press conferences. Most Novak Djokovic press conferences, except after he's won the tournament, have no more than 4 or maybe 5 English questions in them. That's because he listens to the question carefully. It might be something that he wants to talk about, in which case he will talk about it for 3 minutes. Or it might be something that he doesn't want to talk about, in which case he will ignore the question, talk about something entirely different, but also for 3 minutes. And it means invariably that he can avoid some of the tougher questions. I mean, don't get me wrong, he's also very good at answering tough questions, as I said. He is both evasive and also filibustering, and probably one of the best at doing it.
I think, just for example, that stuff about, was it last year at the Turin, with that stuff about his drinks, where he was very specific. He wanted to make a point that nobody knew what was in his drinks, but at the same time, his guys were mixing them in plain sight of everybody. Now, it just seemed very, very odd that, like, if you don't want anyone to know what you're drinking, just mix it backstage or something and have it taken out or something. But it was very specific. Like, look, we're putting all this into this bottle and no one knows what it is. And then when he's asked about it, it's like he then kicks off that anyone's asking about it. It's, that was easily avoidable.
What's very weird.
The same thing with all his injuries, I feel.
What's very weird as well is like, and no one is ever obliged to tell us what's wrong with them. Like, obviously. I always think it's a bit weird that tennis players can be quite so secretive about their lives sometimes, as though there's much of a competitive advantage to be gained. But anyway, no one's under any obligation to share what their injuries are. But as you say, Calvin, the drinks thing was incredibly mismanaged, or it was the greatest PR play of all time, yet to quite decide. But if you're going to talk about the injuries, you are then going to get asked about them, and vice versa. The reason I say that drinks thing might be the greatest PR play of all time is that if Novak Djokovic then does release a range of sports drinks, it's genius, because it's like all people have been talking about is what Novak Djokovic puts in his drinks. He still won't tell you, but you can buy a bottle of it, and it's just water.
So no ingredients on there. No ingredients. That'd be the selling point.
Yeah. Well, his mate Chervin will have blessed it and rearranged the molecules so that it does something special to your body. But it's I know what you mean, and like, do I think that he's as manipulative as you think he is? Maybe. And certainly in pre-tournament press conferences, I always take everything players say with a pinch of salt, because it's like, what are they trying to achieve? Like, whose head are they trying to get in? Who's pissed them off, like, on the practice courts the day before, and they want them to say something pointed about? There's always context and subtext, but
I find the thing about the injuries a bit strange, because I've always found it a bit odd with tennis players when they don't say what injury they've got. Like you say, no one's obliged to do it, but I don't really see what the point in not doing it is, because I guarantee you that the players will know what's wrong with somebody. Like, they will, their coaches will talk, or they'll often talk themselves. Like, there's no way that if, for example, peak Federer is struggling with a hamstring strain, he runs into Nadal, he's not going like, oh, what's wrong with you? Oh, can't say. It's just going to go, it's feeling my hammy a little bit. And, it's like, that's how it'll be. So they cover it, they don't say it in public, but you then think, well, and I don't get, if you're struggling with if Novak Djokovic has 12 centimeters tear in his hamstring, right? He either has or he hasn't. And if he has, then the player who he's playing against will figure that out within about 1.5 points. Like, so just saying like, oh, there's nothing wrong with it. He went, even in the Australian Open, he went from there's no problem with the hamstring to it's a 12-centimeter tear, and then end up winning anyway.
My favorite player in this arena is Victoria Azarenka, who not only will not say what she has, but then she gets kind of very agitated that you're interfering in her medical history. I'm like, come on,
Yeah,
this is ridiculous. Like
it does, yeah. It does annoy me when people think that injury news is like the same as revealing that someone's medical records. Like it's not the same. Like, you're able to say that they're the same and you're sort of technically true, but the spirit of what you're saying is just disingenuous in its entirety, quite frankly. I was just trying to check exactly the story, but I do remember, just kind of going back to Djokovic and that injury, you have to remember that after one of his matches, there was a pretty big altercation in the locker room between, I think, Djokovic's team and one of his opponent's team that was written about in a couple of places, and I just can't find the story just now. Like, people knew what was going on, and people were like, we were not the only people annoyed about it on the outside. Do you know what I mean? Like, there were people within the locker room who were getting wound up by what was going on. I think that's quite instructive. I'm sure that will feed into the Djokovic siege mentality, because everything that he does, he loves the idea. And Goran Ivanisevic is the exact same, and his father's the same. Djokovic's father, that is. And all of them have that same, and it's a very effective motivational technique. And we just asked Jose Mourinho, thinking that everyone is against you is a great way to make sure that you fight even harder than you ever could. So, I don't know. With all that in mind, Nadal's injured, Djokovic is injured, and Carlos Alcaraz has just lost to Fabian Marochan, who is the world number 135. He has never played the main draw of an ATP event or beaten a top 100 player before this Italian Open. In Alcaraz's words, he surprised me a lot. His level was really, really high. I'm sure he's going to break into the top 100 very, very soon. I'm sure he surprised you, Carlos. I'm sure he surprised a lot of other people. He certainly surprised us. I'm trying to work out exactly where he is going to be. He's going to be the world number 114 at the very least, having reached the last 16 in Rome. So Alcaraz is probably right. He is going to break into the top 100 very soon. George, I know you were regaling us with stories of this match while I was cooking. What? How? Why? Who?
I was actually quite impressed with this guy as well, because I tuned in the back end of the second set once I'd seen the score, and I had a 20-minute quiet period at work, so I thought I'd cash in on a bit of Alcaraz action. And
that's your taxpayer dollar hard at work.
That's my taxpayer dollar. Yeah.
No. My taxpayer dollar, not yours. That's my taxpayer dollar hard at work.
Disgraceful. I made up for it with some extra quick 20 minutes afterwards. So.
Flexi time.
But yeah, there was a lot to this guy's game. I think I texted you guys saying he's out drop shopping Alcaraz. I mean, he had really good touch. He played big points quite well. There were a few where Alcaraz just did absolutely unbelievable defense. And it's one of those points you're watching like, oh my God, how do you put this guy away? The other guy's definitely going to just miss a really easy forehand just out of kind of frustration at trying to put Alcaraz away and not being able to. And he didn't. And he was down a break in that second set tiebreak as well. And you're thinking, oh, here we go again. Alcaraz is going to just find a way and get going. So yeah, I was really, really impressed with him. Alcaraz, again, I've said this about the clay courts so far. I don't think he's really played that well for the last kind of week and a half or so. He had a good spell in, it was Barcelona, wasn't it, where he beat Tsitsipas and he was playing really, really good tennis. But since then, I've not really watched many of his matches and thought, ooh, this is a guy playing absolutely at his best level. And that's a compliment in some ways, because he's still been winning matches and getting through. But he will certainly hope to find better form. And I think Rome is a lot more similar to the French Open than many other surfaces in the build-up. So I always take quite a lot of credence from who's doing well at this tournament compared to Madrid, where it's just like that's just a completely different surface. To be honest, I don't really take much stock in that. And the fact that Zverev kind of had him last year, that is degrading him a little bit. The only thing I'd say to Juventus is I just don't see that many guys who are going to beat him over best of 5 sets, and whether Djokovic is there or not, I'm not quite sure either. So he's still my favourite, but he will certainly have to pick his level up a little bit if he's going to beat guys like Djokovic at the French.
You're talking about Alcaraz here, not Marochan, yes?
I'm not. No, he's in great form. He's nailed on to win the French. He's 99%, as Calvin would say.
But before we come on to talk about Carlos Alcaraz, Calvin, we should talk about Marochan a bit, who may already have played Borna Coric in the last 16 by the time that you're listening to this. But have you worked out whether he is the same Hungarian lad who you thought had been going okay, or is this actually just one of the people you've never come across on the Challenger Tour?
No, I mean, it's obviously not the same, because didn't somebody, I don't even know if the player I'm thinking is Hungarian, didn't somebody with a red, white and green flag do quite well in Monte Carlo or Madrid?
I tell you what, you sound like a real expert right now.
I'm sure someone did, and I just assumed it was the same guy who was on a bit of a run. But no, I've no idea who Marochan is, to be honest.
Well, he lost to Ben Shelton in Calgary in May, where I believe you were, but I'm guessing that you weren't.
Cagliari, you mean?
Yeah, yes, exactly. Yeah,
right.
Is that the Italian pronunciation?
I mean, it's where everyone. Calgary's in Canada, and Cagliari's in Sardinia.
Okay, very good.
No, there was. I'm sure somebody was on like a bit of a run, like in Monaco or in Monte Carlo, or I'll have to have a look.
I mean, there were 2 Italians in the quarterfinals of Monte Carlo. Their flags green, white, and red. That's the best I can give you.
I don't know. What about that Georgian guy? Was it Jordan? That guy from Jordan? Didn't he get into? Yeah.
I don't know if I could put this on the podcast. Just us saying, who's that guy? It's like nursing home tennis. You know that lad. The flag's sort of green. Was it Madrid or Monte Carlo?
all of my capital of knowing like players ranked between 100 and 250 is going out the window in about 90 seconds here. So I'm now just going, in with the flag.
This is not a 90 seconds we could ever send to a podcast awards. I think we need this one buried deep in the archives.
Yeah, I'll trim it down. It'll be fine.
I'm sure someone did. Someone with a red, green, and white flag has done quite well recently, and it's not Italian.
Okay, I'll take your word for it, and thanks for the big insight. Oh my goodness!
I mean, it might even be that. I might even be the same guy I'm thinking of, and I just probably watched him for 10 minutes against Ben Shelton and thought this guy's all right.
He won a challenger title back in March in Antalya and got to the semi-final of a I can't pronounce that, Szekesfehérvár, which I think is also in Hungary. But 2 of those matches he did win by retirement, so maybe he's some sort of aggressor.
I mean, in all seriousness, look, what would you say his ranking was, James? Like 150-ish, was it?
Yeah, 135 at the moment.
Look, if you're ranked 135, you can seriously play tennis. We're not. I know some commentators would have you believe that you're a journeyman at that or what have you, but you're playing some serious tennis if you're 135, especially if I think he's only like 22, 23.
Yeah.
So he's on the way up, and I'm certain that he'll be. If you're 22, 23, and you're beating world number 1, then you're going to be top 100.
I mean, there's obviously a whole lot of answers to this question, but making that sort of 100 to 40 or 30 jump, like what other things that people do? I mean, other than just maybe getting a bit lucky, like getting a decent draw 1 week so you can make a big jump forward, like what are the things that people at that level tend to work on?
Look, if you're ranked 135, you can seriously play tennis. We're not. I know some commentators would have you believe that you're a journeyman at that or what have you, but you're playing some serious tennis if you're 135. You need, I mean, what you need, it needs to be a perfect storm. You need some luck. If once you've got kind of, I mean, they work in stages. So 250 is always the first one that you aim at because that's basically qualifying for the slams. So that'll be the first target for any player who's seriously trying to achieve. And then you're kind of like once you're getting into, around about 120, then you're going to be sneaking into some of the slams and that kind of thing. And then obviously top 100. But once you get in the top 100, you do need a bit of luck. Because you need a bit of luck in the big tournaments, in one of the slams or the Masters. You need a bit of luck there where you can get one of the better players or one of the seeds who's a bit off form, and you can get yourself into the last 16, that kind of range. Because the problem is then, even if you're doing kind of okay in the 250s, then you're not really going to move up very much. So you need the points from the big tournaments. And that's kind of like, that's the same in singles as it is really for the lads who I coach in doubles, who are currently 50. And, what they need now is they need a run in one of the big tournaments in order to be able to make that next jump. Because if you can be sort of winning 250s at that stage, and you're probably only going to move up 4 or 5 spots. And within that, you need to be playing well when that opportunity comes. There's no use having a bit of luck with a draw, and then you're just playing crap at the same time. You need to have a good spell where you're playing well, or you have the ability to win matches when you're not playing well.
Yeah, and there's also like that. Yeah, there's kind of that problem where as you work your way up the rankings, especially if you're making fast progress, you're playing the biggest match of your life quite a lot. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, you also like the biggest sort of nonsense that you ever hear is like that draws don't matter because you got to beat everyone in the draw anyway if you're going to win it. But that's a nonsense because if you're going to play, there's no point going, say you're going to have to play, I don't know, say you're going to play Alcaraz. Anyone would rather play Alcaraz in the third round than the first round because it means you're two rounds further on. And those ranking points, that's a lot more money. You can do, gives you financial security a bit more. And you've got the ranking points to take you there. So everybody would the draw in tennis is hugely important. And on a separate point, I always say that sort of being ranked 50 in the world-ish, sort of 50 to 100 in the world. Now, 50 to about 80 or 40 to about 80 in the world is kind of a really rough position because it means you're always going to be playing in the first or the second round every week. You're going to be playing one of the best 8 players in the world probably because you're getting in most of the tournaments, so you're not having to qualify, so you're not getting those matches in that, but you're not high enough ranked to be seeded in most tournaments, so you're ended up having to play one of the seeded players because in any tournament, if you're not seeded, you're going to play a seed in either the first or the second round. So it can be really hard at that stage to really get a run going.
It's kind of it's almost exactly what Andy Murray's been talking about, isn't it? Where he, keeps turning up to Masters events and playing like a seed in the first round. And he's like, well, I'm going into this cold. Whereas obviously, as you say, when you're a top seed, it's a little bit different. Let's talk about Carlos Alcaraz because, as I said in our WhatsApp group earlier, it's always good to talk about the people who've lost in a tournament because what you say tends not to be dated quite so quickly. George, you said you don't think he's been playing that well, but you also said that Rome is somewhere that replicates the conditions of Roland Garros best, which should kind of take down the strength of your conviction about his chances at Roland Garros, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think his comments were quite instructive today in the sense that there was a lot of praise towards the opponent. I do think you can't underestimate that. I do feel like this guy beat Alcaraz rather than Alcaraz playing so badly that he lost it. Alcaraz sort of said, it's really, really hard to maintain that same level he kept for 2 straight sets. It's even harder to maintain that for 3 to 5 sets. That's a massive challenge, and that's where guys like Novak have won and lost huge matches in the past is they know that guys below them who aren't as good, even if they're not playing so well, they can't play at their very, very top level for a sustained period over a best of 5 sets match. And as soon as they take that twist in them and dent that confidence, that's how Djokovic runs away with so many matches when they're kind of 2 sets down. So I think there's probably a bit of a sense of that from Alcaraz, and I think that's what his camp will probably say. You didn't play so badly today that it was embarrassing. You kept it close. In a best of 5 sets match, you'd have time to turn that around. You would have more physicality. It would mean more and more. So yeah, I certainly wouldn't be ringing any alarm bells. And he quite interestingly was talking about and I think Calvin might disagree with his assessment of this, but he was talking about how he actually wanted to spend longer on the practice court rather than, he said, I've been almost playing too much recently and I actually need to spend 3 or 4 days practicing. I don't know what the balance is with that. I kind of feel like I don't think there's any problem with him losing early-ish in Rome in terms of he knows he's got that winning feeling from these previous tournaments in Barcelona and Madrid. He's felt a bit of the conditions this week. Probably a bit of rest is quite good for him, and he can kind of get his head down and work on 1 or 2 things and kind of mentally get himself ready. That's probably not the end of the world. But yeah, I'm really struggling to think who are the guys I'd be backing to beat Alcaraz over 5 sets, which is the most compelling arguments I have at the minute for him, even though I don't think he's quite at his best right now.
Yeah, it sort of feels like we're talking ourselves into a conclusion that no one is going to win the French Open because everyone, everyone you can make an argument for has some quite serious flaws in that argument. Quite an interesting point that George raises there, Calvin, about practice and you talk a lot about match tightness and how important and difficult that can be. Are there times, especially if you're winning a lot of tennis matches and therefore not spending a lot of time practicing, can you foresee a time when a player might feel out of practice despite being in match?
Yeah, but I don't think, he knows himself more than anyone else, really. So, it's whatever he feels. He's the best tennis player in the world at the minute, but it's not something that I'd think. I'd much rather players be playing matches than practicing. Once you get to a certain level, you can have the odd training week and that kind of thing. But that tends to be if you've played sort of 7-8 weeks in a row, that you might want a couple of weeks of practice. He's only played 1 tournament on the clay, and he's had a week off since he won that one. So, I don't think if I was his coach, I'd rather him still be in the tournament rather than going, we can do a few drills.
He's played 2 on the clay, to be fair. He played Barcelona and Madrid.
He
has had a couple of weeks off. I guess a week off since winning Madrid. But there is an argument that, as well, this 2-week Masters thing is taking a little bit of a toll on these players. You take Arina Sabalenka, for example, and I joked in the intro about recharging because about a day after Calvin said he didn't like it when players put they needed a recharge after playing 2 tournaments in 3 weeks and losing in the first round, she subsequently lost in the first round of Rome to Sofia Kenin and tweeted that she needed a recharge. In fairness, she did get to the final of Stuttgart and Madrid before losing in that first round, but it does kind of mean her Madrid Open lasted from the 27th of April to the 6th of May, so that's best part of a week and a half. And obviously you get there a week before, so you're in Madrid for 2.5 weeks. The Stuttgart Open, alright, had only been a week, but you combine all that, she probably didn't get to Rome till Sunday or Monday, a couple of days there. It probably does feel, Calvin, like there's not a lot of time off left in this schedule.
They're just bullshit. They need to do away with these 2-week Masters. There's no point in them at all. They're only there because we're just trying to add extra days onto tournaments the whole time. And it's all, it always used to be that, I can't remember which one, Miami or Indian Wells used to be a 10-day one. It used to start on a Friday. But now we're just doing them all. They're all these, Monaco's now. Monaco even starts on the Sunday, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. But they probably have to because it's such a small venue,
Yeah, I don't mind, the extra day because it's the same amount of the same draw size. But I give you some context to it. That the doubles in Madrid last week, which a couple of weeks ago, they started early. So the doubles was at the semi-final stage by Monday night. So by then, like, there's just no point in that. You're playing tournament didn't fit. The final wasn't until I can't remember whether it's on the Saturday or the Sunday for the doubles there. But that means you got two more matches in a week, and it just makes no sense. What if you I, if you're going to do it, do an extra round and start it 2 days earlier if you want for the non-seeded players, I guess who haven't probably been playing somewhere the week before, and do it that way. But to start doing all the Masters like this, and it just messes up the schedule as well because they can't have a 250 on the same week that there's a Masters, which is another problem. So you can't have anything. So for some players, if you're not creeping in the Masters, you don't have a tournament for 2 weeks. Or you're going to have to go and play challenges. And all you've got then is you end up having what they've done now is they end up having these 175 challenges, which I think are actually a good idea. But those tournaments are supposed to be for players who are trying to break through to the level where you can get in the Masters. And all that happens is the players who are out of the Masters early just go to those two and play in that. So you can have, again, I'll use a doubles example because I tend to look at those draws more, but I know this happens in singles, that Lloyd Glasspool and Harry Helivara lost in Rome yesterday, and they've gone straight to Bordeaux to play that. Now, I don't blame Lloyd and Harry one bit because they can do that. But the two guys that they're playing, who are Jebbins and Franson, have had a really good year this year, and they're trying to break through so they can get into the Masters. Now, they've got an opportunity to do that with one of the biggest challenges of the year in a 175, and you're getting a couple of guys who are top 10 in the world in the first round. So you're taking those opportunities off as well.
And what seems unfair about that is the Italian Open and the Challenger in Bordeaux are in the same week of the schedule. The Italian Open started a few days earlier than it used to.
Yeah.
But they're effectively in the same week. And as you say, by virtue of their world ranking, they're essentially getting 2 bites of the cherry at a tournament that week. Yeah. Whereas, as you say, Jebbins and Franson are only getting one. And that happens all over the place. I mean, really, it's unjoined up thinking, which is unsurprising. And it's thinking that it's basically just dominated by the people who own the rights to the Masters series, and however influential they may be within tennis, and we know exactly how influential they are. My feeling is that the Masters events should be 10 days. I think that's fine for the simple reason that more tennis played at events on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays is a good thing, because it was always insane that Wimbledon stuck with Middle Sunday as a rest day. Middle Monday would have made a lot more sense. But Middle Sunday, one of only 4 days in the championship which people could technically go and watch without taking a day off work, is, from an accessibility perspective for fans, ridiculous. So I don't hate the idea of a 10-day Masters event for that reason. But yeah, to extend it to 2 weeks and not to have a more joined-up approach with the schedule underneath it and thinking about the players who have to cope with the consequences. Hopefully the tours will look at that and go, okay, how can we mitigate this better? For me, the obvious thing is to, as you say, I think the Challenger 175s are a good idea because they create more of a stepping stone. But the obvious thing to do would be to link a 250 to it. Say you can have a 250 during the second week of a Masters event. Start it on the Tuesday or the Wednesday, make it a slightly smaller draw, so that if people want to, who lost worst first round and second round, go and play, they can, because otherwise they'll do it in a Challenger 175. Make it geographically quite close to the Masters event. Hell, even give the license to the people who own the Masters event. I don't know. But create some sort of, offshoot so that you're not wiping out the schedule in that way. They sure as hell won't do it that way, and I'm sure there are a million reasons that a tournament director could tell me that's the wrong way of doing things anyway. But it's a thought, and it's the first year of them sort of rolling out the 2-week Masters more widely, isn't it, George? So there's always a chance that they may revise it, or not. They won't get rid of it, but they might think about better how to do it.
Yeah, I think even just a higher volume of challenges or Challenger 175s in the second week will do the trick. I think, as Calvin says, it's the problem is you've got people coming out with very high rankings who want more tennis, still know they're going to get some decent points and some good matches, but you're just cut legs off people who've actually earned that ranking and the chance to play at those events, and they want to kind of have the extra reach upwards. So I think to mitigate that, you just put more of those tournaments on, and then that solves the problem as far as I'm concerned.
Actually, at that level, that it's not even for points, George, because the points, 175 points at that stage, won't actually make much difference. It won't take you up really any at all. So basically, they're just turning up for match practice, and that's like, that's what I can't see any sense in from that regard. But yeah, I mean, tennis really does have this problem though with scheduling. Like the French is just ridiculous. Like, you've got a 2-week tournament that you've always fit the right amount of matches in, and it works in terms of where each match falls and that kind of thing. Then the French have just decided out of nowhere that they need an extra day and a night session every day. So now you've now got this situation in the French, and we had it last year, and we're going to have it again this year, where there's going to be a few days past, like, once you get to like the first Thursday, where there's basically hardly any tennis going on in the middle of the day, you're going to get to sort of, there's going to be about 4 matches on each day, because by then you're down to a 32 draw, and you've got 10 days to do a 32 draw. And that's like now. So you're now telling us, right, the French. So now you're telling us you can do a 1-2-8 draw with some buys given in 10 days, right, at the Masters Series. But the French are going to be down to the last 32 with 10 days to go. Now that doesn't make sense. That's an extra 2 rounds. So it's just ridiculous. And we're only going to add them on. And like, I think we even spoke about this like last year. Like, before long, guaranteed, the slams will be 3 weeks. They'll just start doing 3-week slams.
Yeah, it doesn't feel.
So they'll figure out we can sell. We'll figure out we can sell the tickets.
I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? Like, and I sort of have some sympathy, because the numbers don't add up in tennis. We know that. We know that you can't just create more things without more money coming in somewhere in the tennis pyramid. You need the money to come in to create more things, and if you want to create things, you have to cut things back if you're not going to have that extra funding. But they do need to be slightly more long-sighted about it. I think they're very short-sighted in for the most part. But that's just my opinion. I don't run tennis, thank God. So who knows? Let's move back onto court, shall we? Although Holger Rune would probably rather we didn't. People may have seen on Twitter, or if they even watched the match themselves, that he was booed onto court before he played Fabio Fognini in Rome. He beat Fognini 6-4, 6-2. I suppose you can understand that on an Italian court, playing an Italian player, there might be a slightly hostile atmosphere, but, George, booing isn't something we do in tennis, is it? We're much better than that.
It's really rare for it to happen before a match. I can't really remember that happening in the last few years. I'm sure some smart aleck will have a backlog of this, but I can't remember a match I covered where the player coming on court was greeted with anything other than at least faint applause, even if they were supporting the other guy more. It is quite remarkable, really. I don't know exactly what's triggered it, beyond maybe they've been listening to this podcast too much and they're a crowd of Calvin Bettons. But yeah, it is great. I do think it's quite a good thing in some ways. Like, obviously, I feel a bit bad for Rude. It's not nice for someone to kind of just get random shit. But this is a sign that there's a guy cutting through in a way that's provoking human reactions, and whether that's a good or a bad human reaction, that's a good thing for tennis. People will be interested if Rune plays into this and hates the crowd, even though Calvin's convinced that won't happen one day. I think this is a sign it might be happening. Tennis's new bad guy is here.
Am I right in saying that you once got sneered at by Maria Sharapova for asking why she had got booed in Australia?
Yeah, she wasn't very happy. She got booed after taking about an 8-minute toilet break. And was it Barty she was playing? I can't remember who she was playing now. It was a long time ago, but I'm pretty sure it was an Aussie she was playing. And yes, she wasn't happy with that, and it got cut into a little kind of 1-minute viral clip, along with a question from Stu Fraser about her being rubbish after since she stopped taking Meldonium, basically. So you had our two questions and Sharapova looking very grumpy at us, and the angry British press going after the players again. We were all kind of slaughtered, but.
Yeah,
good times.
you soon find out that people don't like it when you actually ask interesting questions in tennis. But anyway, Rune said afterwards, after winning, he said, actually, it was a couple of guys who tried to make me lose focus behind the court. But yeah, guys, it didn't work. I stayed in the zone. It was just, support for him during the match. Of course, it got closer in the first set and they were getting wild, as I said before in the match. But again, I played good. I was staying focused, and that's all that matters. I guess, Calvin, if this is going to keep happening, he's going to have to find, not a coping strategy, but he'll need to make sure that he doesn't let it affect him negatively. I remember Djokovic saying that he used to pretend they were chanting his name in the crowd, even if they were chanting Roger's name instead. I suppose he can convince himself they're just saying Runa instead of boo, right?
First of all, I don't even know if they were booing for him. That crowd, Fabio Fognini to that crowd is an absolute hero. They absolutely love him. And anybody who I watched him play doubles the other night, and the stadium was packed, and they were all in the tiebreak. They were just all chanting Fabio, Fabio, like that. There must have been 7,000 or 8,000 people around the court just chanting that for a doubles match. And I think they would have just booed anybody who was coming onto the court with him. I don't even think that was Rune. That's the way they are. It's the Italians. You see from their football culture and that kind of thing. That's how they support sport. And I don't even think it was anything really to do with Rune. I mean, I'd have booed him because I think he's a bit of a prick. But I don't think that's why they were doing it. And to be honest, he's just a way better player than Fognini at the minute. And I think that wasn't like, he managed to come through it. It was just like Fognini's had no sort of year. He had a couple of good matches here, but
it made me laugh, and it just made me think more about Holger Rune as the kind of bad guy of tennis. And I've been trying to think for a while who he reminds me of, and it's not a specific person. But it's a whole genre of films that are always about English public schools in the sort of 70s and 80s. And Holger Rune is the spit and image of a conglomerate of all the bullies in those films. Always just very sort of quite pretty, blonde, constantly smiling in a sort of snide way. He's the exact same look of bloke.
Is he though? I find this stuff about him being the bad guy of tennis. I just think he's not, because he's just like a spoilt child. He's not.
Oh no, he's a shithouse. I mean, he's a shithouse.
I don't even know if he's a shithouse though. He's just everything. Even when he's shithouse, it's all spoilt child stuff. He's not like a real bad. Fognini was a real shithouse. And he was He would the argument he had with Murray a few years ago when he was he shouted when Murray was about to put a ball away or something, and then just shrugged his shoulders when Murray kicked off at it. That was the Rune's just I just think he's just a bit of a bell. I don't even think he's got that bad guy of tennis thing in him, because he's too clean cut for that. I know what you mean. He's like, but I think I disagree with that. I think he's more like the guy in a film who's just a bit of a grass, and he would just always go and snide with the teachers and that kind of thing. He's more like that, I think. But I don't think there's any. I don't think he'll ever get I'd struggle to see what, and I don't want to bring it back to with McEnroe, but McEnroe and Connors, where you had people who hated them and you had fat people who were absolutely loved them. Connors and McEnroe, more, but I guess more McEnroe because of the way that he played. But you had these guys my dad was just absolutely loved John McEnroe. He would, and Connors was kind of the same with other people. Whereas I don't see Rune ever having any real fans. Don't see what there is to really. He's not compelling in that regard. I think you'll just get people who most people will just want him to lose, but you won't ever get anyone torn on him and dividing opinion.
From your descriptions, James, which do you think this is definitely not equally matching your description, but the person who jumped into my mind was actually Draco Malfoy from Harry Potter.
Yeah, I mean, and I would say that the sort of unoriginality of some of the creativity in the Harry Potter films, and I appreciate that I'm potentially opening myself up to quite a lot of abuse there. I do like Harry Potter storylines generally, but some of the kind of stereotypical casting, or writing, I should say, Draco Malfoy basically is just a sort of conglomeration of all those stereotypical bullies. Like, that is not an original thought, I'm afraid. But yes, there is an element of Draco Malfoy to him. I hope he leans into it. The funny thing is, actually, that the only time I've really met... I mean, I've been in Holger Rune press conferences, but at the US Open last year, he wasn't in the main interview room. That people won't know this, but there are lots of different interview rooms. There's the big kind of press conference room, and then, especially during the first week when it's busy, a player will be like, right, I'm ready to go, and they're like, oh, well, we'll just put you in this little side room, and there's usually not a camera in there, there's just a few journalists and the player. And we did one with Holger Rune, and he came across really nicely, and then we finished, and because of the layout of the stadium, we were all wandering up, and we were talking to him about football, and someone said, oh, do you have a team in England? He said, oh, I sort of follow Man United. And someone said, I can't remember who it was, so I can't name and shame them, but someone said, oh, Peter Schmeichel, is it? I pointed out a couple of minutes later that Peter Schmeichel probably stopped playing for Man United before Holger Rune was born. He's that young, which actually in turn made me feel extremely old.
It did. Peter Schmeichel's last match was 1999.
Then that is before Holger Rune was born.
Maybe he was enjoying Peter Schmeichel's short stint at Aston Villa instead, where he, of course, famously scored a goal.
But he also scored for Man United. But yes, he did. I mean, he didn't say anything about Aston Villa, I'm afraid, George. He said Man United and very little else. Well, I mean, he said other things as well, but when it came to football. So, yeah, I hope he leans into it, as I've often said on this show.
I give Rune a bit of stick, but what I will say about it, I don't know him. I've never met him, but everyone I know who's met him has said that he has outrageous self-belief. And I think that type of personality, if you have that much of unwavering self-belief, it can sort of make you a bit of a sociopath that you don't come across that well in general. But it's bloody good for sport, bloody good for athletes.
I seeing as we're being a bit negative about people who could win the French Open, Holger Rune's in with a shout of winning this tournament.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so.
He's probably in my top 5 people who can win it.
He's as far as I can tell, he's fully fit, which is is a pretty big bonus at this point compared to the state of the top 10. I mean, I had a conversation with someone I was talking to Barbara Shett this morning, and I was just trying to work out if I was not allowed to say that I was talking to Barbara Shett, but I think that was fine. And we were talking about dark horses to win the French Open, and we had already spoken about Djokovic and Nadal and Alcaraz, and then it was a bit like, well, I guess it's like there are a few people who could, but it's quite hard to really believe that anyone else can, even though there does appear to be quite a significant opportunity. I don't know whether that's post Big Four syndrome, where you just find it hard to believe that anyone else will win a Grand Slam, but and Alcaraz is obviously the exception that proves the rule there, but it's hard to think. I was just trying to get the odds up in front of me. It's hard to think that anyone out, Holger Rune must be 4th favourite or 5th favourite, right?
I think that there's only 2 things that you take into account when figuring if somebody can win a big tournament. Are they good enough to win it? Do they believe that they're good enough to win it? And on both fronts, I'd say Holger Rune is definitely yes. And you struggle to see how many others you would say in both of those categories. Like Medvedev even, I don't know if on clay he's good enough to win it. I don't know if he although he's won a slam before, he has had doubts that have stopped him from winning other slams. So I don't know if he thinks he can win the French Open. On that regard, you'd probably say there's only 3 of them. It's Rune, Djokovic, and Alcaraz. Because Medvedev, such as Zverev and Tsitsipas, I think they're both good enough for Zverev pre-injury. were good enough to win slams. I don't think either of them fully believe that they can win slams.
Yeah, I don't know about Yannick. I don't know if Yannick Sinner believes that he can win a slam at the moment.
I don't. I think it's a little bit different with him. I don't think there's a case mentally for him. I don't know whether he's good enough. I don't know whether he has enough variety to his game. I think actually mentally he's pretty solid. I don't see him not believing he can win one. I just don't know if his A game isn't working. I don't know whether he's got anything else.
The other thing we were talking about earlier is like who can beat Alcaraz over 5 sets. I mean, Rune's record against Alcaraz is technically Alcaraz has one, which is a very spurious one, having beaten him at the next gen finals. So playing to kind of 4 sets, like that should not count on your record. And Rune's won the other one. Okay, Alcaraz retired, but it's like he retired at 6-all in the second set. So it was 6-3, 6-all in Paris. So this is a guy who definitely again will not arrive into any match against anyone phased. He's beaten Djokovic before. Okay, he's maybe waiting for that huge slam win against a big player, but yeah, the belief's definitely there, and you have to, begrudgingly in Calvin's case, admit the qualities there as well this year, and he's been on a very solid upward trajectory. This could be his moment, given everyone else doesn't feel quite perfect right now.
I disagree a bit on that. The next gen match shouldn't count. It's still a tennis match, and they're still going head to head on it. You know, when it comes down to it, they're not thinking, oh, that this is different. Equally as far as I saw something the other day saying that it was talking about, I forget who it was, but it was 2 players who were around about the same age, and they played each other a load of time in juniors, and then they listed their like head to head, but it was just seniors, and I thought, well, there's an argument that you also count the juniors there, because if they've played like a year before in juniors and then go into the seniors, then it's the same. It doesn't get wiped clean, especially not in the player's mind. If you've lost 4 matches in a row to somebody in juniors, in the latter stages of juniors, that's not something that you wipe clean in your own head when it comes to senior tennis.
I'll tell you exactly why they don't include that. It's because the record keeping on junior tennis is less readily available, basically. So
ITF's is all there.
Yeah, but it'll be. It's like if you Google it, you can get the ATP head-to-head record very easily, and it'll mostly be there. But the ITF stuff is not. It's not as reliable.
Okay.
And like it'll literally be availability of data. Like just. I think probably should count junior stuff, like especially in the women's game, where like you could still be, you can be 16 or 17 and playing junior tennis, and you can also be 16 or 17 and playing professional tennis. Like presumably there's not, although
I think it was maybe someone like Medvedev and Zverev or Zverev and Tsitsipas, and it said something like in their first meeting and it was about like 6 years ago or whatever, and I thought like that's not their first meeting. They'll have played many times over the last 15 years.
The junior record that was brought up all the time, of course, was Tsitsipas not Alcaraz, Ogier Aliassime, wasn't it? I mean, because Ogier Aliassime completely hammered him at juniors and won something like their first 4 at seniors, I think, and it took Tsitsipas basically 10 attempts to finally get one over on him. So occasionally it does crop up and they talk about it.
It doesn't surprise me somehow. As time goes on, I'm starting to regard Stefanos Tsitsipas as a bit of a slow learner. Like, I mean, you could cut that clip and say I'm starting to regard Stefanos Tsitsipas as a bit slow, and I probably wouldn't disagree. But he does seem like someone who takes a while to pick things up, Calvin.
I don't think he's a slow learner. I think it depends on how quick a learner his opponents are, because the smart ones realise his backhand shit in about 4.5 points. And like once they figure that, then you've got him beaten. If you've got anything, if you got a decent kick serve and a decent cross court backhand yourself, then you've got his number.
All right. Well, we'll see if he learns the backhand. When Stefanos Tsitsipas keeps committing to opening various schools. Like in Australia, he didn't have to do it. In Australia, he said that he was going to open a school in Melbourne if he won the Australian Open, because he saw on a number plate that Victoria is the state of education. That's their like marketing thing. I mean, the things that goes through, either a lot of things go through Stefanos Tsitsipas' mind, or very few things go through Stefanos Tsitsipas' mind, and either could be true, quite frankly. He's either like the most intelligent bloke who's ever played tennis, or like one of the stupidest, and there is no in between, and I'm not sure which is true. But anyway, let's move on in case Stefanos Tsitsipas ever hears this podcast. A few results that are sort of noteworthy already from Rome, and a few defeats for players. I mentioned Aryna Sabalenka earlier. She was beaten by Sofia Kenin, who is back. I don't know. It's a decent result. When we had Rick Macy on a couple of weeks ago, who, if you haven't listened, then do go and have a listen to that podcast from 2 weeks ago. I think it was plenty of interesting things to say. He worked with Kenin when she was as young as 7, and he said that she was a fighter. He'd never met someone so competitive and kind of sticky at that age. Didn't he say
that about both Williams sisters as well?
Well, the specific phrase is escaping me about Kenin. But
he met her at 7. The Williams he met later, so that's probably
exactly.
Difference,
that might be his get out of jail free card there.
Okay.
George, you had something else to say.
I was going to say, I think the Kenin result is quite funny because I don't know if you saw this before Rome, the tournament was happening. It was promoted with a tweet that listed the top 8 seeds, and it had Sofia Kenin as number 7 in a quite good gaff. But clearly that gave her the belief to then take out world number 2.
I mean, it was only 3 years ago she was a French Open finalist, which is pretty wild to think. But she did then go on and lose to Annalena Kalinina 4-2 after beating Sabalenka. So obviously she's not in the red hot form, but nice to see a few signs. I mean, look, I don't know Sofia Kenin personally, and she's obviously been through an awful lot. And we can talk about women's tennis and one slam wonders as much as we want. It's not nice to see someone who obviously has a lot of talent and has been in 2 slam finals then completely lose faith in the game in every possible way, as far as I can tell. So what a story it would be, by the way, if Sofia Kenin came back and won another slam as well. That would be pretty cool, I think. So and we'll probably give quite a lot of other one slam winners some belief. And speaking of one slam winners, look at that absolutely flawless segue. Emma Raducanu's former coach Andrew Richardson has been talking this week in an interview with Mike Dixon of the Mail. I would recommend, if you go on my Twitter, it's on there, but I recommend everyone goes and gives it a read, because it is really the only time Richardson has spoken since he was obviously dispensed with as Raducanu's coach shortly after the US Open. The headline reads, "I wanted to carry on working with Emma, then I got a brief phone call and that was it." It's really interesting because so much has been said. I spend a lot of time frequenting some quite weird Facebook groups that obsess about Emma Raducanu, just to kind of try and keep my finger on the pulse of what this incredibly passionate fan base she has are thinking. And the Richardson stuff, it's just in those groups and in other places of the internet, it is accepted fact that Andrew Richardson wanted to go and coach his son Rocco, and that's why he didn't get the Raducanu job and turned it down. And it would appear that the main reason he wanted to do this interview was to kind of dispel that rumour. He said they had a 9-week trial period agreed, that they were renegotiating a contract about 2 weeks after the US Open, and then, quote, "I got a brief call from her agent telling me they were going to go in a different direction, and that was the end of it. I certainly learned a lot from the whole experience. Life has moved on, and I'm very busy." He's now working in Spain at an academy there. His son Rocco is a good player and is also playing out in Spain, but he says that was not part of the reason why he didn't continue talking to Emma Raducanu. He had a plan for her, and quite simply, they didn't want his plan. Calvin, I don't know whether that is surprising to you to hear any of that, but what do you make of the hearing it now?
I mean, it's not surprising to me because I knew that 12, 18 months ago when it happened. That's what I was told from people who would know. So there's no surprise there. I mean, even didn't make any sense. For the stuff about him wanting to be on tour with his son was just nonsense anyway, because his son at the time, I think, was 12. And even if every man needs a job. Who did people think was paying him to just go around the world with his son? But I mean, look, look, my position remains the same as it was then. It was absolutely nuts that they didn't give him a contract, give him a 1 or 2 year 1 year contract to carry on. Like, you have a trial period and you win the US Open as a qualifier. Like that's the trial. Well, we're going to have a 9-week trial period, and at the end of the 9-week trial period, you win the US Open from outside the top 100, and then you go, yeah, don't think the trial period went well. We're going in a different direction. That's perhaps in all of the time I've been in coaching, that's the biggest piece of bullshit I've ever heard. Like to say that you have a 9-week trial period, then at the end of it you win the US Open, and then you go, yeah, we don't think the trial went that well. Like, just absolute idiotic. And then you look at where it's gone since then, and you do it all comes back to that for me. And I'm not saying this. I've not spoken to Flex in probably 15 years. I haven't seen him, and I know him, but I wouldn't say that I'm friends with him. So that's not. And I don't dislike him. I've always had I get on fine with him. I just don't know him very well. So that's not me sort of standing up for one of my mates. I just find it absolutely crazy that they came to that decision.
George, Emma Raducanu's loss is the Ferrer Tennis Academy's gain, where he is now head coach and working with a few interesting players out there, I'm told. Were you surprised by what you read in that interview at all?
No, not overly. Yeah, it's hard to really disagree with Calvin on that one. I think it's not. You can't really say how it would have worked out either way, and it may just be the case. Look, in Raducanu's whole career, she just got hot for 2 weeks, and that was it. But it does just feel one of the more baffling situations in all of sport that I can remember. Just someone winning something of that magnitude and then not being given a chance to carry on, where it's not been the case that the coach has walked away themselves. I can't really think of a better example. I've got sort of tangentially, but I've got a bet on with a friend this season that if David Moyes wins the Europa League for West Ham, he'll keep his job, whereas my friend is adamant he'll be sacked or will leave regardless of whether he wins it, because the apathy is so big towards him. And, that's obviously an incomparable situation to Andy Richardson, but that would be kind of similar to me in terms of a club winning something they've just never won, and biggest title of their entire history. Then suddenly the guy who's won it just being kind of sacked on the spot. It's just utterly nuts. And I think what's different between Richardson and Moyes is he didn't really get a fair crack at showing a long time. I think Mike wrote in the piece. He's got a pretty impressive thing on his CV, is 100% winning record of Grand Slam matches. Not many coaches can kind of boast that. That's not a bad one to say, but it's one tournament at the end of the day. He's not had that chance to then show, look, I've taken this player from here and here, and there's arguably something more impressive about taking a player throughout a whole year and keeping them at an incredibly high level rather than just having 2 weeks where it goes perfectly.
I think the weirdest thing was the stuff about we wanted somebody experienced on the tour, it was just crazy, because I always say in sport that experience is the most overrated commodity in sport. Sport doesn't really play out like that. And anyway, like, how many of these experienced coaches have won a Grand Slam with a player? And so what is experience? And also, Flex he's older than me. I think he's probably approaching 50. So it's not a young coach. Not like you were going and getting a young coach. So it just made no sense to me at all. But it was around, and I don't even know whether we're still in this period with this obsession that Emma knew better than all the coaches. Like, she can't get a tennis coach because she knows more about tennis than all the coaches, which is just such a daft way of looking at it, and just brushing off, and the lack of any sort of respect that was shown within that team to any coach who came along. Oh, we just know better. We know better than the guy who won a Grand Slam with us. We know better than Nigel Sears, who's taken numerous players into the top 50 in the world. And she went to the, what was it, last 16 of Wimbledon with him as coach. We know better than Nigel Sears. We know better than Andrew Richardson. We know better than all the other coaches. We know better than Louis Caillet, who we didn't didn't carry on working with for one reason or another. And it's just this arrogance that, anybody can make a mistake. You could go, right, we made the wrong one. But how you've ended up changing coaches about another 6 times within that 18 months and not picked up the phone to Andrew Richardson and gone, look, bygones be bygones. We made a bad call there. What's your number? How much do you want? That's what I find crazy about it.
Can you tell me what Flex is about, Calvin?
Flex is people call him Flex because he's very, very tall, very, very tall and quite lanky. So, that's like Flex is like a piece of cable, isn't it? Like that's kind of like what he's always been known as.
As far as tennis nicknames go, it's quite a good one, given that it's usually just the first syllable of your name followed by O. I think that's an improvement on some of the other offerings. But yeah, I did think we wouldn't. I thought we might make it through a whole podcast without mentioning Raducanu's name. Actually, I'm sure it'll happen at some point. But news is news. So what you can do? Let's move on. There's a few other bits of WTA. Well, not necessarily news, but things I wanted to talk about, and I guess it's kind of relevant to talk about Caroline Garcia at this point because she's had a few coaching in and outs over the last few months that have caught the eye. She was beaten by Camilla. Her name is Maria Camilla. She goes by Camilla Osorio, who is the up-and-coming Colombian. She beat Garcia in straight sets in Rome. Caroline Garcia has not been in great form. She lost to Maya Sharif in Madrid. She lost to Potapova in Stuttgart. She lost first round Miami and third round in Indian Wells. It really has been a fairly torrid few months, and she pretty much broke down in Rome after that defeat, and it was quite tearful and quite painful. You'll remember that she split with her coach Bertrand Perret at the end of last year in a slightly odd one where he didn't seem to really think. I think they split mid-tournament, George, is that right? And then he didn't really know why that was happening. He then came back in April, which is probably a sign that things weren't going well. It's not been very nice to watch from the outside, George, has it?
No, I mean, it's a bit of a funny one, really. I'd say this kind of spell of bad forms really come a bit out of the blue. It felt like she'd won the WTA finals at the end of last year, which, as we've known on the men's side over the years, is far from a guarantee of success in the
in some ways it's the opposite in the men's.
Yeah. But she has reached a couple of finals. She has had some decent results at matches. So it's not been like a whole season of doom. This has just kind of come around quite quickly. It escalated quite quickly. I mean, it's a funny thing though, confidence, isn't it? I mean, you can be playing really good tennis in the form of your life, and it just takes one sort of mental bump. And I think it's fair to say, with all due respect to Garcia, her mentality is probably as much as anything what's stopped her from being that top player. She's an incredibly talented player. It's just that self-doubt that exists within that has probably hamstrung her. To use Calvin's phrase earlier, is she good enough to win Grand Slams? Probably yes. Does she believe she can win them? Probably no. So it's kind of not that surprising to see this sort of dip, and it's not the first time in her career. She's seen her ranking go up and down quite dramatically in the past. But it's still very sad to see this and very frustrating. And you talk about the coach there, James. I mean, there could be all sorts of things going on there. I mean, the blurred lines in tennis as a whole, in terms of what's happening in terms of relationships on and off the court. You have no idea the sort of reasons behind it, and that's not even just limited to that relationship. There could be any other sort of relationship going on that could be impacting her, or other things happening in her life that she may not realize but are kind of having a knock-on effect on court as well. So it's always very, very complicated when it comes down to mental stuff like this, and I hope she gets it right, because she is French at the end of the day and will want to do well at her home slam, and this is a very bad time for this sort of form coming in when you consider she was in the form of her life about 4 months ago.
Yeah, I mean that is all true, and I don't disagree. My other thought about it is that the form and game style that we saw kind of propel her into that world ranking. She's now number 5 in the world. Was a sort of hyper aggressive, getting up inside the baseline on serves. It got her to the semi-final of the US Open, and she said quite sort of plainly, she said, it's a risky style, but it works, and I'm going to keep committing to it. And I remember specifically against Jabeur in the semi, where it wasn't a great match, to be honest. It wasn't working. And her father, who was in the stands, who has also coached her for a long time, was making these hand gestures, 2 hands pushing forward, saying, keep going forward, get, if anything, get further forward. And I think that seemed like quite a joined up piece of thinking. But the flip side of that is that graph will go up as well as down. If you play high risk, it has high variance. And it must be so hard if you're trying to play like a hyper aggressive, hyper risky strategy, Calvin. If it starts going wrong, I imagine it's hard to like retain the faith in that and also regain the rhythm of it.
Yeah. I don't really have anything to add on that. I think you're right in saying that, and again,
that's great. That's all I needed from you, Calvin.
I just find, I think some of these players are so rash in the way that they make these decisions, and it's often not based on tennis and improvement, and it's quite emotional, and it almost never works out.
Right, well, let's move on to one more French Open contender. Discuss specifically Barbora Krejcikova, who's obviously a former French Open champion. I felt desperately sorry for her at the French Open last year because she was obviously the defending champion. Have I got that right? I think she is the defending champion. She was the defending champion, yes. I'm just trying to get the years right. And she turned up. She had not played very much. She obviously had an elbow injury that was really troubling her. And in fact, it saw her lose to Diane Parry, I seem to remember, on Chatrier. She was in tears afterwards. She felt she hadn't given a proper defence of her title. She has played some very good tennis at times this year, but she was beaten by Yelena Ostapenko in Rome. George, you were the one who flagged this to me because I actually didn't notice I've been a stag do for the last 2 days, so I wasn't watching Ostapenko versus Krejcikova, but it ended 7-6 love, which probably takes Krejcikova out of my, I wonder who the dark horse at this year's French Open might be.
Yeah, I've been a bit surprised, really, because as you say, it felt like she was starting to get a few results stringing together, and I thought she'd be one of those who would be in the mix to challenge Swiatek, who I think, is head and shoulders above the rest as far as I'm concerned at the French Open this year. But it's just not really happened for her. I mean, the matches she's lost, okay, Sabalenka in Stuttgart, that can happen. Martic, that's another player who's been very deep in a French Open before, semi-finalist. And then Ostapenko has, of course, won it. So, maybe it's a harsh handful of matches to judge her on. But, yeah, I think for someone who's as good as she is and has played well, I thought she would lay the groundwork a little bit better. That said, it doesn't really matter what your form is like before the tournament. If you turn up in good form and suddenly win it, then these matches will turn into a bit of an irrelevance. But it's kind of I think the other player I've mentioned on the order of play was Gauff as well, who, you're looking at players you're thinking about might challenge Swiatek. Gauff, we know might not challenge her from a kind of one-on-one perspective. She's got dreadful head-to-head, but she was a finalist last year. She was playing really good stuff. She's another one who's kind of coming into this tournament. You're like, it's really hard to see Coco Gauff winning this. And I don't think that, even despite all of her deficiencies over the last couple of years, I wouldn't have said those words before a Grand Slam, really. Particularly one that she's done so well at last year. It just feels a lot of players aren't where they should be, and then I'm not sure Sabalenka's good enough to beat Iga Swiatek at Roland Garros. I think she could beat her on other types of court, but just not that one. So, yeah, I think it's all lining up quite nicely for Swiatek on the women's side, I suppose, is the long-winded way of saying what I'm trying to say.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's insane. Coco Gauff hasn't won back-to-back matches on clay since she got to the final of Roland Garros. And, as I say, she is the defending finalist, which is not really a phrase that exists, but she's the defending finalist, and you'd be hard-pushed to find anyone who thinks she's going to repeat that feat or go one further. She lost to Badosa in Madrid, she lost to Buzkova in Rome, she lost to Potapova in Stuttgart, which isn't the worst thing in the world because she's obviously been in some pretty good form, but overall not a great run. I mean, Calvin, do you have any dissenting voice on that? Is there any way you can see her regaining some of that form, finding a way through the draw?
No, her forehand's in probably the worst state it's been in. I don't, she doesn't seem to have any confidence in it. It's a double whammy, really. She doesn't have any confidence in it, and the players seem to be openly talking about it. I mean, Badosa said before she played her that her and her team had a special plan for it. Special plan seemed to be just hit every ball to a forehand. It's I don't really see where that goes, to be honest, because from somebody who we thought was going to be a multiple Grand Slam winner, she's now looking like one of those where you think, well, where's she going to win a slam? Because she can't hit a forehand with any sort of meaning or intent at the minute. I can't see any way that she'll be making the final again or anything close to the final. I'm not as I do think Sabalenka has a better chance than what George does against Swiatek, though, purely because Sabalenka thinks that she can beat Swiatek, and a lot of the players don't.
And stylistically, Sabalenka is the kind of player who has given Swiatek the most trouble over this sort of, 2-year period where she's dominated the women's game, or maybe a year and a half period where she's dominated the women's game. Someone who can consistently take the racket out of her hand, and who can get hot for an hour and a half. That's the kind of player I think who's unlocked her.
Yeah, and also the French is the slam that is most affected by the conditions.
Yeah,
because it can be so variable. In that, if you have a wet and cold couple of weeks in Paris, which is feasible in May, then a certain type of profile of player is more likely to do well than if you have a hot, dry couple of weeks.
Yeah,
and Swiatek will be hoping for the former of those two, and Sabalenka. If you get the latter of those two, if it's hot and dry, I think that greatly increases Sabalenka's chances of winning that tournament.
And I was thinking about this today, and actually when George mentioned the weather, I literally stuck the telly on because I always try and have the tennis on when we're talking about it, and there wasn't any to watch because the weather in Rome is pretty awful, and it I think is supposed to continue being pretty awful. The summer spring has barely even started in Northern Europe. The weather's been awful in Britain. Paris is not that far away from London, and it's not been great there either. So there's every chance, I'm going out to Paris a week on Thursday, you're going out a week on Saturday, Calvin. There's every chance that it could still be pretty rubbish by then, and we do have a quite miserable couple of weeks in Paris, which maybe there's no such thing, but the weather could play a pretty serious role. I think that's probably all we've got time for this week. George, have you got any other business that you'd like to raise or extend my evening further with?
No, I'm happy to tap out here. I think this podcast will be forever remembered for Calvin's great description of red, green, and white flagged players. So that's I think we've heard enough from us all today.
Hopefully that ends up on the cutting room floor. Sally Scissors will be making an appearance, no doubt, and that will be lost on every listener who will be going, what did Calvin say, and rewinding back to find it, and it has been cleverly airbrushed from history. Maybe when we do a Tennis Unfiltered live, we can reveal the source of Calvin's.
I'm sure it was one of those
Don't
players.
Double down, Calvin.
No,
Don't double
I think
down.
It's probably like somebody who maybe has won a match in somewhere, and I thought, that's a good result. That guy's in good form, and then just mix him up with another guy who's won another match.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for listening. As always, please do leave us ratings, reviews, personal messages, gifts, chocolates. various different things posted through the letterbox are always appreciated. I will post George's address online later. Most importantly, though, please do come back next week.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Sports Social Podcast Network.